Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to our Intro to React workshop. But before we get started, we just wanted to introduce our Spring 2024 internship for GDSC. A link to apply is written on the whiteboard, and also up here, there's also a QR code. We will be accepting applications through the next week, so I believe they're due on the 20th at 11:59. And you will basically have a chance to kind of intern, shadow the officer team, and see how we organize our events and handle club affairs. So we look forward to seeing your application. Okay, so now we will be learning a little bit about React. So I'm just going to really quickly go through the different components of React as a framework, and then you'll have a chance to go through a demo project, and Cohen will kind of be leading a demo. So to start off, React is a front-end JavaScript framework. So it's essentially a JavaScript library developed for building user interfaces. And so what this allows you to do is build components that can be assembled to, or that can be used to assemble a more complex UI. So components are customizable and reusable building blocks of a web page. So this can include navigation bars, login forms, buttons, and each component has its own functionality and is responsible for a part of the interface. So there are five main concepts. This is the second one, document object model. So this represents page structure, allows programs and scripts to update content. I like to think of it as like live updating. It's not necessarily that way. But if any part of the document object model has been changed, that will update. And then you can see it in the user interface. So the next concept is properties. So properties are instructions for a component to change how it looks or acts. But components that receive a property cannot modify that property. But if there is a parent component, that can modify a property for its child. And so this allows components to communicate with each other, and you can make your like website or app more dynamic that way. The next concept is state. State is memory for a component to keep track of its property changes. So something that is really common that people will teach are buttons. So every time you click a button, it increments. And so the state is the counter. The counter keeps track of how many times the button has been clicked. And so these can change over time, and state is internal to a specific component, which is not like properties. And then the last concept is JavaScript or JSX. This is a JavaScript extension that looks like HTML. And so it's a way to incorporate your HTML code with your JavaScript code, which is important because a lot of web dev involves HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And so this lets you kind of work on all three simultaneously. Okay, so now we will be going through a demo that Cohen will lead.
Go to the tutorial link over here, tinyurl.com/react intro. That will be good. Once you've done that, can I get some thumbs up to make sure everyone's on that page? We'll go ahead and start with a sandbox editor. If you don't have React installed, so you should be set up. Just go to the tutorial link and we'll start once everyone is ready. Go to the link, you should get to a page that looks something like this. Does anyone need any more time going to that URL? Cool. All right, let's get started. So once you're on this page, this is our tutorial that we'll be following. So if you ever get off track, you can always raise your hand. Someone from up front who can help out. But there's also, it tells you exactly what things you need to code, along with different intervention steps that says, hey, if you get lost, you could just copy paste the entire thing. I suggest you guys type out manually things that you see for the first time. But once you've typed it out once, you can go ahead and copy paste everything else. It's a good way of getting a better memorization, better understanding. I might be copy pasting things just to help make this go through faster to see type out. All right, so I'm gonna go on the assumption that you guys don't have React installed, and because of that, we can use an online sandbox or online editor. To do so, if we scroll down a little bit, so we scroll down past the what are you building all the way to setup for the tutorial. The setup for the tutorial is a code sandbox that we would like to fork or make our own copy of. So in the top right of this sandbox page, we can click fork, and that should bring us to a code sandbox where we can log in with our UCSC Gmail, UCSC email address, and sign in so we can start editing and playing with this code for the tutorial. So go ahead and sign in. If you don't sign in, you're not going to be able to edit it, so might want to do that. Pause screen and give me a thumbs up once you've signed into the code sandbox. Once you've signed in, you should see a screen that looks similar to this. This is very familiar to those who've used VS Code. We've kind of split our desktop into on the left, which is where we'll be playing with all our code, and on the right, which will be our preview of our web page that we are making. Again, our goal is to make tic-tac-toe, and very clearly, this is not tic-tac-toe. Tic-tac-toe, this is just a square with an X in it, but eventually, this is going to become a full-fledged two-player tic-tac-toe game. Does anyone still need any extra time for signing into Code Sandbox and getting a screen that looks similar to this? Do you guys need me to zoom in? You guys see from the very far back. You guys can see? Perfect. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So if we see on the left on our Explorer page, we see a bunch of different files. The three main files we'll be looking at, or mainly just the app.js file, is we have app.js, which is where we'll be building all of our components. So all the different objects we'll be playing around with. We also have index.js. We won't be touching this one at all, but this is just kind of bridges app.js and styles.css file together so it knows what to look for different things. If we can look at the styles.css, which is our CSS file, it contains a bunch of different information about the different components and different things we can play around with. So we can check the different margins. There should be a .square part in our CSS file. This gives information on the square component that we'll look at later. And you can go ahead and play around with this if you want. For instance, you can change the background to be a different color. I could change it to be, I don't know, some like light blue just for fun. And when I save it, it should automatically update on the right-hand side. So change the background blue. And hopefully we should be able to see it once it finishes. After subsequent reloads, it should be significantly faster. So it should just be connecting. Does anyone have any problems or issues setting this up so far? We're all good? Perfect. Okay. Once this loads, hopefully we can continue on. Is anyone else's preview loading indefinitely? Because everyone else was able to change the background. Let me reload the page. Right, give me a minute. I gotta do my own thing. Could I get a thumbs up if you were able to get the background color to change? It loaded. Correct. Um, you don't need a copy of what I'm doing right now. Just creating a virtual machine with Leap to get it to work. Hopefully it sets up. In the meantime, I guess from what you guys will be seeing is on your app.jss file, or your app.js file, you should see. Sorry, all right, you should see the code here on should see what that's right here. Export default function square and then return some buttons. You can look at the top part. This is our definition of the component square. If we remember back to our CSS file, that was where we were editing some of the details about that component. Additionally, we have the export command, which the keyword, which signifies that this is something that can be, this is a component that can be accessed from other files like the index.js file. The default represents, this is our main component of our file. Think of it as a Python main function. That's the export. In this case, this is the main app.js. Finally, we also need to return. The returning is a single JSX object. In this case, we're defining it as a button with the class name of square, and we're printing out the letter X, which is why we're able to print X within the box. Let me see if my code has set up. It is still setting up. Okay. Hopefully, this still works better for you guys. So we can go ahead and continue on with the tutorial. We've already looked at the different files, and now we can start to build the board. So as we saw in the basic tutorial, we've only built a single box. So tic-tac-toe, it's not just one checkbox. We need to have 9 of them. So if we try to, for instance, just put different buttons sequentially, we'll have an issue. So you see here, we return 2 buttons, just one right after the other, and this will break. It says JSON and JSX elements must be routed. And that's because anytime we return something within a component, we can only return a single object. In this case, we're returning 2 different things, which is why it breaks. Instead, we can return it as a fragment, also known as an array, list, things that are sequential but considered a single closed object. To do so, we can add these couple lines here. Brackets with a closed version. Is it expensive? Oh my gosh. 9 bucks. All right, cool. Yay, my that box is working. So let's go ahead and add all the things that we discussed previously. So if we go to our app.jsx file, we can go ahead and add our fragment, which contains all multiple buttons. So go ahead and copy that. And when we save this, we should get 2 buttons. So now, since we want 9 boxes, we can go ahead and copy paste this button here 9 times. In this case, we want 7 more to get a total of 9 buttons. You're trying to do it 9 or 3 by 3. React board. So is this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. However, when we go ahead and save this, we can see this does not look like a 3x3 tic-tac-toe board, right? It's a single one length array. To fix that, we can use divs. Divs are a way of creating new lines. So if we go continue down the tutorial, we can create a new div with the class name of board row. So we can go ahead and copy that from the tutorial, and this will make it so we can separate our checkmark boxes into 3 separate rows because we're using 3 div classes. So let's go ahead and replace what we have currently with those divs. Again, you can find all the code if you want. You can have that a separate window or page. Let's go ahead and run that. And now we have 3 by 3 board. Now with each of them numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way to 9. As you can see here, when in our definitions of the buttons, we have exactly what we're printing as a string 1, 2, 3, and so on. So now we can go ahead and continue on and rename our component. Because we've now created a board, we no longer need to call this component a square. Let's go ahead and change this to board. From here, we can then start going ahead to identify how we can actually make these individual buttons, because we don't want to just display a static number. We want to do something. If we want, we can create something for every single one of these buttons, define it 9 times. Click on, we've all completed. No, that's not the best. It's just redo something 9 times. Instead, let's create a new square to be able to have that use that multiple times. So we can go ahead and do that by defining a new component above our board. We'll call that square. So it's define it function square curly brackets. Inside that, we want to return the exact same button keys. I'm going to turn off the AI editor because I don't enjoy it, but you guys can keep going. Is everyone following so far? That thumbs up. Okay. So everyone is caught up so far. We've just created a square component. So now that we've created our square component, we can go ahead and use that existing component in every single. We no longer have to redefine it. We could just create a new instance of our square object. So if we want, we can go ahead and replace that line with just an instance of square. Go that here, which defines square. We can do that for all 9 of our buttons. You can type that out yourself, or I'm just going to copy again from the tutorial. Just like that. Well, on everyone's screen, do you see a 3 by 3 board that where each square represents shows the number 1? I get a thumbs up if that's what you see. There we go. Well, we're going to go on the assumption that I did it correct, and you guys can keep following along. All right, so the next thing we want to do is we don't necessarily want the value to be 1 for every single one of our board pieces. Because of that, we want to be able to store a value within our square object. To do so, we can pass in a value as a property of our component. So to do so, we can put curly brackets within the definition of a square and type in our value, which is something that we want to input here. In addition, instead of just displaying the number 1, we want to display that value that we pass in. If we type in just the word value, instead of it displaying 1, it will display the word value as a string. Because we don't want to just display the string value, we want to actually display the variable or what's inside that variable. We want to enclose that in curly brackets. So we do that here. And that's with our new definition of a square, we can then pass in what we want to display as well as a property. So hopefully if we run it now, we should get a 3x3 board of blank squares. The reason for that is because we're not actually passing in our squares for our when we create our instance of squares. So to do so, we can add the property value within each instance of square. So for instance, for the first one, we can give it a value of 1, and the next one value of 2, and so forth. So when I save this will be 1, just to that. Then we can go ahead and do that for every single one of the squares within it. Again, I'm just going to copy paste replace everything. And still, for whatever reason, mine's not working. But does everyone see a grid of numbers that go from 1 to 9 in a 3x3 column? Give a thumbs up if you see a grid that looks something like the thumbs up if you see something like that. Does anyone not see that or have some issue like I'm having now? Cool. I'm just gonna go ahead and place everything. Okay, cool. I restarted. All right, cool. Everyone should see something like this. Obviously, yours might be a different color depending on what color you change your background to in this CSS. So now we actually want to make it interactive. We want that every time we click it, we put a check marks in it as before. So to do so, we're going to add a function within the square component. We're going to call that handle click because we want every time we click on it, for it to do something. So we call it handle click. And every time we want to click on it, let's start off by displaying a console message. To do so, we want to do console.log and whatever we want. So in our case, I'll just put clicked. And it should display the message clicked every single time we click on one of those squares. Let's go ahead and save it, and we can open up console by clicking the top right. If anyone's played around with F12 before, it should look something like pressing F12. We'll go on the console page. Try clicking on something here. Another thing we want to, before we can play around with that, we also need to change what we return in our square component. So not only are we returning the square component, but we're also we also need to return our function onClick, which is able to handle that button. And so I'm just going to copy paste from the tutorial, and we can get our new return statement. We just broke it down to one line, but also keep this as a single line as we had it. For now, we have onClick. It should run the function print clicked into our console. Let's go ahead and save that and test it out and see if it works. As you see, I click on the line square and display that, hey, it recognized the clicked, printed it out. If it's more, it will notice it. So if you want to do a counter like that and play around with it. But that's just the most basic way of handling it. But if you notice, if I click outside of the board, yes, for sure. See that again? The console, yes. So you should see on the top right, there should be a console icon. On that. I think it starts off on the Elements tab. You might have to change it. See it? Perfect. Anyone else have any questions before we move on? Cool. So everyone's following. Perfect. So Now we want to actually remember the state of our object or we want to see, we want to remember, hey, has this been clicked before? If so, then we don't need to worry about it clicking again. So to do so, we want to import a React structure called useState. So to do so, it's similar to what importing things in Python. And we can go ahead and paste that in. Import useState from React. This will allow us to build different states by using the useState keyword. So now in our definition of square, we can add a new property or new state below. So for instance, we can call it const, and we'll do square brackets inside square brackets. We want to give it a name. So in our case, we'll just call it a value, and the keyword to update this, in this case, we can set it to save value. So anytime we run the command set value, it should update value what we want to update it to. Additionally, we want to set this to use the useState React keyword. So we type is equal to useState, and we want to set a default value. In our case, we want our default value to just be a null. We can play around with different things if we want to start out with a number. Go ahead and put a number and set null within that use parentheses. But as a default, we'll just keep it as a null variable. We don't. So now we can go back and update our board. We no longer. That is a long verse. Oh, and we no longer want to pass in the values since we'll be updating the value as an input parameter to our square. And because we do that, we also need to remove the value property in every single one of our squares. You can delete it manually. I will just copy paste from the tutorial. All right, cool. So now when we run this, we should get a bunch of length. All right, so now we can go ahead, and now we want to say, every time we click it, we want to set our value to be a check mark, an X, or whatever we want, and then to go ahead and display that as well. So instead of printing out that it's equal to our console, we would like to set our value to become X, or whatever we want to be displayed within squares. So in our case, I'm going to add set values. This is how we update here. So remember, when we defined our value, we used the keyword set value as the term set the value. So in our case, we want to set the value to become an X every time a square gets clicked. The nice thing about that is now every time we click it, the value gets set to X. And when we actually display the square component, it will also display that value as the statement. So when we go ahead and click things, we can see that now an X is appearing every time we get thumbs up for one's following so far is able to get it. It adds in text. Beautiful. So that will be the end of what I'll be going the tutorial from my end, you guys. If you guys can break up into groups of 4, there's more to this tutorial to kind of complete the game. And once you go into group 4, you can complete the tutorial to eventually build the game. If you have any questions, we'll walk around and help out. This is just to help get you guys started by using the sandbox and add your own twists and build the tic-tac-toe game. So if you have people around you, try building teams of 3 to 4 and work with one another to help finish the tutorials. Go ahead and talk amongst your neighbors to build them. Or if you don't have people together, I'll be walking around and help. So far, does anyone have any questions to where we're at right now? Yes. And hopefully it'll work because there's a bunch of issues the first semester. All right, so you guys should all be on. Tell me what it looks like this, right? Oh, we love it. All right, well, hopefully back in space. In the meantime, for you guys, so for this tutorial, we need to set up React and thing. You can set up React, that'll take. Instead, we could just use an online code editor. In our case, we'll be using something called uh, Code Sandbox. If you scroll down to set up the tutorial, you'll see this code box and then the top right button. Go ahead and click that, and that should open up a new page. This is our Code Sandbox. It'll look very similar to VS Code if you've used that before. And this will have everything pre-downloaded and stuff that you need. In order to be able to edit and run things, you will have to sign in. Top right, there'll be like a sign in button. Just use your UCSC Google account. Set up and start editing things. Oh, I hate Plug. I gotta fix it.